Welcome to the Dismantling Racism series right here on Rainier Avenue Radio. We appreciate you for tuning in. We will be turning it over to our friends here in just a little bit, so stay tight right here on Rainier Avenue Radio, your community radio station.
going to be on the radio today, Mike. Can you see that we're, well, it's on. There it it is.
Hello, good morning. Thank you everyone for your patience as we work through these technical difficulties. And those of you who are in the Zoom link, I hope that you are getting us live and clear. We're currently being live cast on Rainier Avenue Radio, which we are so grateful to have this opportunity. And now I can see all of you. And Connor, great, awesome. Thank you. And Beverly is going to do a little bit of an introduction. Beverly, you want to go ahead?
Sure will. Good morning, everybody. Let me see, and just let somebody in and introduce too. This is a huge collaboration, huge in the sense that many people joined together to be with you this morning. United Peers of Washington, Disability Rights of Washington, Washington State Community Connectors, and STEP, the Peer Navigator Training Program, Unleash the Brilliance, Rainier Sound Radio, which Carmen just mentioned, and the panelists will introduce themselves and we'll jump right into the agenda. Thank you everyone for being here.
Yes, thank you so much. So my name is Carmen Pacheco-Jones, and I am what you would call a social justice warrior. I've been working relentlessly within our community. I'm in Spokane and in statewide to disrupt systems of violence, which is included with systemic racism. So I am very excited to be here as one of your presenters this morning, and I look forward to engaging in some dialogue. Beverly will be here to help us navigate the chat space. So if you have a question, a comment, please, put it into the chat, which Beverly will relay to Connor and I. And again, I want to thank all of our sponsors. I also want to encourage you to join next week's event and January's as well. Next week will be focused on the school to prison pipeline. We have subject matter experts and individuals with lived experience who are now working with youth as they serve the youth and also dismantle this process of funneling children into the justice system through our local school districts. So Connor, you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Connor Murphy. I'm the Community Coordinator and Director of Services for the Peer Navigator Training Program. I just want to say thank you for everyone being here. This is a huge response and the attendance turnout is amazing. In my work, I really focus on equity, trauma-informed care, and reducing recidivism. Establishing systems that are anti-racist, and really focusing on criminal justice reform. I have the pleasure of working with Carmen on a daily basis, and the work we get to do is just so important for our communities, for impacted individuals, and really changing the way we think about policy, recidivism, systemic racism, and what we can do as individuals to work to change that.
Perfect. And we had another colleague that was going to be joining us, Angel Tomio Sam. She will be joining the panel at next week's event, and unfortunately she will not be able to join us today. I just want to thank again Rainier Avenue Radio and Tony Benton for providing us with this platform. And if you can see, there is a call-in number for people who are listening, people who are watching on the live stream or Facebook Live. Please feel free to call in and ask questions as well. And so let's go ahead and get into it. Do you want to cue up the screen, Beverly?
I am going to try and sneak in there today. Coffee.
All right.
Anything else?
If you can put yourself on mute, please, unless you are asking a question or making a comment, that would be amazing. All right. So, okay, I'm getting a bit of an echo here. So the power of lived experience. I think, I would like to share, I am an individual who navigated the justice system, came up through the juvenile justice system, graduated into the adult justice system a short 2 weeks after my 18th birthday, in which I was arrested for a possession charge, my first felony. And at 18, you don't think about how destructive having a felony conviction can be. And now, many years out, those felonies, which I went on to engage in more criminogenic behavior as a result of an addiction that I was dealing with, you don't understand how, that harms every aspect of your life, your ability to get jobs, get housing. Everything is stacked against you. And, our justice system, is a system that is working in the manner in which it was created to maintain oppression and marginalization and to disproportionately impact communities of color, as well as individuals who live in poverty. I am also, again, as I had mentioned before, someone who works significantly to dismantle these systems. I'm currently statewide during COVID in working with the Department of Health to ensure that people who are disproportionately impacted by COVID are able to access the care that they need. And that is a system of harm, so one that when we look across all systems and the outcomes for, people of color, we see the negative impact of, white supremacy or colonization on our healthcare systems. Part of my lived experience is, ensuring that I am using my experience to help others that are navigating the system, simultaneously, guiding the system to areas of reform. And anybody who has worked within these systems knows that is not an easy lift. The systems were created in a manner to exploit the most vulnerable and to serve the most privileged. Yeah, that's part of my story. And Connor, if you would like to share some of yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an addict in recovery who has also had experience with the criminal justice system. I'm a consumer. I have, had to access services, navigate the justice system. And in my experience being a white man, what I saw was with my friends, with people of color, the way I was able to access services was completely different than those individuals. So coming out and of my addiction, of my involvement with the criminal justice system, being a consumer of those services and seeing how much easier it was for me to access that, it really drove a passion inside of me to change the system because it did not match with my personal values. I did not see equity in those systems. It wasn't an easy road for me. It wasn't fun. It wasn't, it didn't just happen all at once. But the trauma created for me in those systems was much different than those I saw for people of color, people that were dealing with more serious mental health issues. And so as I drove forward and I dove deeper into recovery, that is really where I decided to focus my work and learn how to be anti-racist and find ways to make system changes that do create equity for people in the criminal justice system, people accessing mental health services, housing needs, healthcare, all those systems that disproportionately favor, Caucasian races. And so looking at that and finding ways to do that has been, it's been difficult and it's been a challenge, but it's something that we have to continue to do until we reach a place where we have true equity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Connor. And I think Connor really touched on the dismantling process and the necessity of that. We have been stuck in this state of limbo, and oftentimes these organizations, you're a little bit ahead of us, but that's okay. Stay right there on that slide. These systems of care, these systems that are complicit within the nonprofit industrial complex that are funneling in, millions and millions of dollars to provide care, to provide solutions, yet are not bringing the individuals that are the most impacted to help guide those solutions. And if so, it's often as a tokenizing agent. And so we're not seeing diversity. We're seeing, white-led organizations that are often, complicit within the oppression of marginalized populations that they are created to serve. One of the things that Connor and I and Angel, who you'll find out next week, and as well as our other panelists, we went out and we built our own programs. We saw the programs that were created that worked as a screening out agent that affected the most vulnerable and the most impacted in our communities. And so we, sought through our own, diligence and trial and error to build up authentic programs that would truly serve our people. And that is what, I think these grassroots organizations, these people that have boots on the ground who are the trusted messengers or, entwined within those communities that are being served, they understand the needs better. And people are more able to communicate those needs with them. So I am a significant supporter of the peer-based model or the parent partner model, peer recovery coach. I mean, there's so many different names, community health worker, all of those individuals are trusted messengers within the systems. But when they go into organizations, they are often not paid a livable wage. They're often faced with this power imbalance and almost as if a dismissive attitude in which, because they are individuals with lived experience, they don't qualify for to be able to serve in that capacity. And also, one thing that working in public health, my current position, I work as the African American Health Initiative Specialist. And after 2 years of doing really focused, intentional work in our region of Spokane, which if you're familiar with Spokane, there is a high presence of white nationalism. And by white nationalism, I don't want to confuse that with white supremacy, because all of our systems are infiltrated by or experience pervasive white supremacy. But white nationalism is the insidious, explicit appearance of how white supremacy can show up within these systems, and how the level of toxicity that impacts communities of color. So any questions, comments, thoughts? You can always, if you don't want to unmute and ask, you can put it in the chat and Beverly can read it out to us. All right. Okay. Go ahead.
Hi. This is Aislinn. I know there's way too many people for us to all see. From NAMI, Seattle. I kind of wanted to address what Mike Mathias said in the chat to everyone. I really agree with that. Like, I work at NAMI Seattle, so we're a small affiliate of the national organization. And what we have had trouble doing is getting trusted partner, like individuals who are representative of the populations we hope to serve, to come with us and, talk about mental health with their peers. And so we're like seeking volunteers, but we, obviously the people that we are seeking, they have been disadvantaged. Like the system has affected them, and I'm hoping that maybe we can get some pointers from you on how to build trust, so that we can get volunteers who are representative to come and help us, actually represent the populations we really hope to.
Well, I am the operations manager at NAMI East Side, and I can tell you that our website was continually getting volunteer requests from people that were peers with lived experience that were very, very interested in changing the narrative of that suffering into something positive. I would maybe reach out to that branch and see about that. But really, my question that I offered within the chat continues to be an issue for me, because any advocacy that we seem to do as peers on any of these issues is still being advocated for within the system that we're trying to change. And I feel like that's been accounted for by these structures and these systems, because they're operating by design. So what are we to do that's outside the box thinking that would cause some real change? Because all of the advocacy work that we're doing, I feel like it's already accounted for, and that's really deflating for me. And I'm just looking for opportunities to address that.
Absolutely. I think you guys really bring up some great points. And I think that from an organizational standpoint, this is what we face, right? We're looking at individuals to come in, we're inviting them in with issues that we have already determined that are going to be addressed. And, we're not taking into consideration the historical trauma or the white coat bias or the harm that has been perpetuated on them, even generational trauma. That takes diversifying your own workforce. That takes, looking beyond the volunteer model, disrupting the power narrative that perpetuates inequities. In our program, Connor's and mine, we intentionally pay stipends to our participants. their voice, their experience is worth compensation. Each time those of us with lived experience come into a space where when we're working to address systemic racism and policies and looking at harmful practices or assessment tools that often leave people outside of the system, that is an emotional labor for us. So I hear you saying compensation, maybe shifting that paradigm and, taking into consideration, what is this worth to me? What is this worth to our organization? How do we value and amplify the voice of the most impacted? And I can see some other chats, but unfortunately I cannot see that close. Beverly or anyone else, would you like to share what is in that chat? Can you go back to that?
I can give you more info on the chat. It looks like people are talking about the other places doing studies. Looks like there are people questioning, asking about people looking for ways to advocate and without appearing like a white savior, is what they said. It's okay to continue to expect people with experience to continue to be volunteers, just over and over and over again. And I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one point that is important when we're looking to people of color, to do these types of trainings and do leadership, is I heard somebody say the white savior role, where you ask them to do this work for you, and you're doing something for them, but really putting emphasis on the fact that they are the leaders. Just like peers are, the subject matter experts with that lived experience, really putting emphasis on the fact that they are the professionals in this space, and that their life experience really holds the value when doing these types of trainings. I think a lot of the time that is what can build trust. And that is what we have to work towards, is that they're the leaders in this process.
Absolutely, 100%. And we're going to a break right now, but I would like you guys that are within that population just to look at these images. When we come back, I want to hear what your thoughts are.
Pearson, host of Star Time. And when I'm not busy tearing the roof off the suckers, I'm listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Seattle King County Public Health is working to help keep you and your community safe from the threat of the novel or new coronavirus. Take the following steps to help avoid the spread of all respiratory viruses. Wear a mask around others. Stay 6 feet apart. Limit your exposure and visits to others. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects or surfaces such as remote controls and doorknobs. Wash your hands often and use hand sanitizer. And testing if you have symptoms or have been around someone who's tested positive for COVID-19. For more information, call 206-477-3977. That's 206-477-3977. This has been a message of Seattle King County Public Health.
Phil-Am Radio, servicing the Filipino and Filipino Americans all over the world. Phil-Am Radio, streaming live in the internet every Tuesday from 1 o'clock to 2:30 p.m. Seattle, USA time. We are your hosts. We are Bert Kawili, Emma Heron, and
Manny Panganiban.
Phil-Am Radio.
This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Governor Jay Inslee signed and finalized the statewide election results, closing a long and dramatic election process, at least in the state. According to Patch.com, the move is mostly ceremonial. Individual counties had previously certified their results back on November 24th. The law requires that county auditors wait 3 weeks after the ballot deadline before certifying the election. More Washington residents cast their ballot in the 2020 general election than ever had before, turning in a record-breaking 4,116,894 votes. However, the final tally showed that 84.14% of Washington's over 4 million registered voters cast their ballots. That's 0.47% shy of the all-time record, 84.61% of voters sent in their ballots in 2008 general election.
And that's your news on Rainier Avenue Radio.
You know you can't get enough of Rainier Avenue Radio. .world.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your patience. And thank you again, Rainier Avenue Radio, for keeping us connected throughout King County and across the state. So back to the slides, please. And I want to, maybe one or two individuals would like to share, or if somebody has typed something in the chat that they would like to read, tell me what these images, beyond just the emotional response, right? We want to move beyond the emotional impact, but what does this say to you? Can you go back a slide, please? Thank you. Does anybody have anything that they would like to share?
Or anything that came up in the chat? I see there's some messages in there.
Connor, can you read the chat? Because I can't.
I can't because I'm through this live stream on the radio. When I tried to go into Zoom as well, it made that echoing noise you were mentioning.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. All right.
This is Anne. Oh, are you going to read it?
Yeah, actually, somebody was.
Go ahead.
Somebody was just actually sending a message to me, so that's
what that was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody said, I agree with Mike. I can't get services because I get too much disability, which is so ironic. Yeah.
Yeah. And another way the system, maintains that oppressive impact on communities. So you get too much disability, if you make $1 or more over, they cut food stamps, they cut your access to healthcare, they increase your rental amount. If you're on rent subsidy, I mean, it's all a manner in which to maintain power and control. And it's a byproduct of white supremacy and colonization. And this is within every system that we are speaking of right now. It is pervasive and embedded. The first step is having that awareness and then beginning the process of addressing it.
Absolutely. Yeah, we see this time and time again. And I think the work that we all do, it's super prevalent where there is this policy, these ingrained policies in our system that says, without saying it explicitly, is this is the quality of life that you get if you are living with these circumstances. And it's a complete injustice. And the belief that you can only have, this quality of, care, this quality of life, if you, receive a service or disability, it is just a huge injustice in our community. And it really continues that cycle of, putting people that are disadvantaged in whatever you want to call it, but it keeps them at that same level. So those services aren't available, but they need them. And working to undo that system is so hard because it's been ingrained for so long. It's not something that's new. It's been a way of life for so long, and finding ways to undo that. Finding organizations that don't play by those rules, because it's not a law. It's not something that can't be fought. If these organizations are willing to do some of this work, I think that's what Carmen and I focus on a lot in our work, is that, if you need this help, it should be available to you. And so it's just hard to see. And I think in our work, we see it so often.
Yeah, those low barrier models and, supporting individuals with lived experience. Yeah, thank you, Connor. We could go ahead and go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the objectives for these short 2 hours that we are together are truly to define systemic racism, the systems and structures that maintain, procedures and processes, just right there what's on the screen, how it's defined as a complex interaction of culture, policy, and institution. Name the process of white supremacy and its complicity to systematic racism. I think that that's a huge place of discomfort for most individuals and most organizations. I'll tell you, I was in a meeting with elected officials and appointed officials, across our housing systems that are working to serve, the homeless. And as I went into this meeting, I'm looking around and there's nobody who looks like me. It is all white-led organizations. And while I don't have anything against white-led organizations, I appreciate the tenacity of our, allies, if they're true allies. But if they're showing up in these spaces and then they're speaking for Black and Brown individuals or people who live in poverty, or people who have experienced homelessness and they themselves have no idea what that looks like, or have never experienced it or known anyone, then that's an issue, right? And so as I was in this meeting and I, brought up that, a few of the players were saying, well, I met with, BIPOC leaders, I'm going to report back, and then I'm going to bring their report back to you. I'm like, wait, this is the trust factor, right? This is why we don't enter these rooms, because you continue to talk over us, shut us down, speak for us. We're capable of speaking for ourselves. And because we are individuals that are closest to the problem, we are also closest to the solution. And I don't know if anyone has ever experienced that in their organization. I mean, but that's significant way to undo any trust that has been created, or to move any work or policies forward if you're not listening to the people that they impact the most. So we'll also be creating a set of actions for addressing systemic racism within organizations, and often that comes at a policy level within the boards or within the leadership of your organization. Are there any questions, comments, thoughts?
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Absolutely, go for it.
So and this is just a legitimate question that I have. So, so I know that historically, systemic racism has its roots in, redlining and all kinds of different, mechanisms that we can point out and evaluate and see. And that's clear to me. However, I see this economic inequality span throughout every field of, our society. And I definitely see how systemic racism has its roots in each one of them. But I don't know if systemic racism isn't just a byproduct of economic inequality at this point. Simply because I see more communities, and I see the marginalized and oppressed communities bridge racial gaps in every aspect now. So I'm just curious as to what you think of that, because I'm not saying that it's not important or it's not something that we need to be addressing, and it's not having an effect. But I'm just curious as to what you think about that being the source of today's issues, and if that's the best way to approach these problems first and foremost. I just wonder if we have it turned around. I wonder if we should be addressing the economic inequality aspect, and then the byproduct of that, which is continuous racism, would be reduced. I just don't know. I'm just curious as to what your feedback is.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify what your the question is, whether or not the economic and equities would then, if we support it.
So when the sink broke and the pipes underneath the sink burst, it was because of systemic racism, for sure. But in order to fix those pipes, I don't know if addressing that systemic racism is like addressing, putting a bucket underneath, or if we need to, really address the economic inequality that is currently across all spans, and then that will resolve itself, or at least reduce in itself.
Well, I mean, you can put a suit on a black man and he's still going to be questioned by police officers. He's still at risk of losing his life at the hands of, state supported violence. You can, put a middle-class black woman in the hospital to give birth to her baby, and she has good insurance, and she's still going to be 3 times more likely to die in childbirth than a white woman. So my interpretation
I'm
of
not away from that. I'm just wondering if those problems wouldn't be as visible, not as visible, as frequent if we were all economically viable, if we all had the power and influence to have our voices heard. And I'm not talking about any particular race, or I'm just talking about the marginalized and oppressed in our society.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a valid point, but at the core of all of this is the systemic issues that have impacted individuals. It's this concept, or this widely, conditioned belief system that, we all have bootstraps in which we can pull ourselves up from. And, but if you don't have shoelaces, or if you don't have the boots yourself, how do you improve the inequities within the wealth gap? how if redlining has, kept Black home ownership, and in our area, 73% of Black individuals are renters who are at risk. They're also frontline workers who have lost significant time during COVID, because of the areas of town in which they've been forced to live in. They have complex health issues that make them more susceptible to, being infected by the virus. So I see you theorizing that, if we just throw $1 million at everybody, that's going to fix
I'm
race.
not saying that at all. I'm not saying throw money.
I know I'm exaggerating, obviously. So then tell me then, in a perfect world, what would that, economic distribution of power look like between impacted populations and the dominant culture?
It would look like a civil rights-esque movement towards economic equality instead of what we had before, which it would look very similar, but it would be, that's what we need to have, is some type of movement where, we, rise up as marginalized and oppressed communities and advocate for ourselves in terms of livable wage, the ability to sustain our housing situations, and just advocate for ourselves and use our advocacy efforts towards, really improving those outcomes. That's kind of what I foresee as a necessity in our society. And I'm not saying, and please understand that I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that these are important issues. And I believe that maybe the best way to attack those is from an economic standpoint at this point, because
I mean, we can engage in, many movements which, push our movement forward. I don't think that, one fix is going to be, achievable. There's multiple manners, but to say that one would work better than the other, if we're not addressing the core issue, I mean, we are engaging with whatever every single institution already does, and that is putting a Band-Aid on a symptom.
Yeah,
it's okay. I don't want to spend too much time on this. I know you've got a schedule.
No, I mean, I'm excited. Yeah, I would like to hear, do other people feel that, economic inequality, inequities would, be a cure for racism?
I hate for me and you and Mike to be the only ones talking. I've been just listening and looking at the chat, and I think that people are kind of splitting this between the two when, as you were mentioning in the actual talk that you designed here, trusted partners are who are receiving compensation for their time as experts. It are the best people to address the problem and the closest to the problem and closest to the solution. And I don't think that all organizations fighting for economic equality should stop fighting for that and start fighting for, the partners that can fight for themselves. I think there's more of a partnership that needs to happen if trusted partners are working to fight systemic racism and at the same time partnering with organizations of people otherwise who wouldn't really be those trusted partners and working together to address both at one time. Because I think that, because of the white nationalism that you were describing, the issue of racism has been unfortunately politicalized. I don't know the word for that.
Absolutely.
But excessively right now with the.
What do you mean excessively politicized? What does that mean?
Meaning if you say racism, I feel like most extreme Republicans would just be automatically disregard what you're saying.
So you're saying that racism is a problem for, okay. So I think that it's
You're
real
saying it's
easy
been politically
when we're
weaponized,
talking about why
Yes,
are you
yes.
talking over me?
right? Yeah. Well, I'm just trying to help.
Is there a time in history that race has not been politicalized? Is there a time in history? And I think Em had a very valid point that I think she was going to get into. Em, do you want to continue that thought?
Yeah, I mean, you said that it's unfortunate that only you two are getting to talk, and that's because you just both talked right over the top of me. So I wanted to say, when we're talking about when we start about racism, the conversation almost always gets derailed to talk about economics. It's because it's an easy way. It's an easy way to talk about poverty without talking about race. You cannot talk about poverty without talking about race in this country, because this country's wealth was built on the genocide of indigenous people, and it was built on the backs of Black people, slaves in the South. So you cannot talk about economics without talking about racism, systemic racism, individual racism, institutional racism. It doesn't mean that the conversation about economics is not important. It doesn't mean that they're not intersectional. But if we're going to talk about racism, stop derailing that conversation and trying to make it about poverty only.
Yeah.
You have to stay focused on the racism aspect of it as you talk about economics, as you talk about gender equity and equality, as you talk about all of these other things. There's a reason why Black women were the ones who developed the idea of intersectionality. There's a reason why it happened that way. It's a reason why those women were the ones who pioneered that idea, because you cannot separate them. So stop trying.
And there's systemic issues that lead to the intergenerational poverty, but also we can't get away from the fact that even Black folks who are able to get out of those conditions and gain some wealth, what about when they're harassed by the police for standing in front of their own house in a nice neighborhood, right? So we have to always address racism until we get away from the roots and the cores of the issues that led to this country being how it's been. And I think it's been a scapegoat for a long time to throw on the economic side. And it's one of the tools for the racist Republicans is to recruit the poor whites and to act like it's just a thing, or act like they're better because they're white. So so then they feel like they're having voice. I was wondering myself, why is it that some of the white guys that I knew that seemed like they're saying were supporting Trump? And when I was asking around about it, I finally got to the bottom of it, and they felt like he gave them voice. So there might be a place for giving them voice, but giving them voice in a way where it's actually creating a cure for the problems of this country, and not just giving them a voice to say, I'm speaking for the white man.
Yeah, I mean, Anthony, you bring up some great points, and Em as well. And I'm glad that we're engaging in this dialogue. I think that when we look at, organizations that are oftentimes representing, Black or Indigenous or voices, that because we have been so conditioned into this white supremacy culture, that white proximity means survival, or is interpreted as survival. Oh, if I am accepted in white culture, then, and if I have this perceived, space at the table, however I'm only tokenized, I am still here, I am accepted. But that is not true collaboration or partnership. That is, again, tokenization. I wish there was a better term, that exploitation. And it's a process in which we ourselves, as people of color, need to liberate, our own conditioned, internalized or lateral oppression that we experience within our communities. And we are not building this out. In fact, at the onset of the COVID, it was suggested that why not give each family $10,000, and allow them to navigate this pandemic, but what did we get? $1,200, when other countries are actually supporting their people. We have taken the most marginalized, the most impacted, and those that are at the most risk of contracting the virus and put them out on the front lines, and continue to exploit them. It's no different than the slave block. If I am a board member of a white-led organization and they're parading me around as someone who, is working in diversity, equity, and inclusion, however, they're creating barriers for any accessible change, then are we not just back on the slave block? I mean, it's something to consider, truly.
Carmen, if you don't mind, my name is Terrell Dorsey. I represent an organization in King County called Unleash the Brilliance. I started this when I got out of prison. When I come to these kind of events and I hear about white supremacy and systemic racism, I'm pretty much tired of hearing about it and hearing it described and the daily indignities. I think it could be disempowering for people of color to continue to listen to it and potentially give white people even more power and black people, brown people less power. If we're not doing something at it, for it, or about it at the same time, it could be very overwhelming. And psychologically, I think for me and everyone else in my position, a major disadvantage. I see many people, students of color, who give up against the background of hearing systemic racism, when at the same time, there's nothing being done about it. Unleash the Brilliance is committed to doing something about it by making sure that education isn't or doesn't continue to be lopsided, where you have people going to universities and others going to prison. It's a sickening thought in the 21st century that nothing's being done about it with more assertiveness and with a bigger momentum. So my position is that it's never too late to unleash the brilliance. We train young people of color to understand the philosophy of delayed gratification, that teenage years are your most critical years. Those 7 years last so long, you're going to be in your 20s soon and have potentially, if you're lucky, 60 to 70 years to live. You have to do everything you can right now to really think things through and prepare for takeoff. And if you graduate from high school, you increase your chances of being a pilot of your own life and never be grounded. So my position is that we do something about racism instead of talking about the structure.
Absolutely, 100%. Terrell, thank you so much for being here. Excited to have Terrell on next week's panel. We're going to be going to a break. Beverly, if you can switch the slide to the next one and take a few moments, team, while you can't speak because it would be on the televised, but please use it as a reflective moment on the next slide about why race matters. Thank you.
Would you like to see when your favorite Rainier Avenue Radio show comes on? Check out our show schedule, updated weekly at rainieravenueradio.world.
This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio.
A federal judge sentenced a former public official in Arizona to 6 years in prison for his role in orchestrating a human smuggling scheme. Per NPR, Paul Peterson, who served as Maricopa County assessor until his resignation earlier this year, was sentenced to 72 months in prison for conspiracy to smuggle undocumented pregnant women for commercial advantage and private financial gain. Peterson arranged travel for several pregnant women from the Marshall Islands to Arkansas with the promise that families living in the U.S. would adopt their children. People from the Marshall Islands are legally permitted to enter the U.S. and work in the country. However, the agreement bars Marshallese citizens from entering the U.S. if the primary purpose of their travel is adoption. Peterson lured the pregnant women into the U.S. with payments of $10,000. He charged U.S.-based families a fee of $30,000 to $40,000 for completing the adoption from an expecting Marshallese mother.
And that's your news on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Sergio LaCour's Love Lines. It's on RainierAvenueRadio.world. Thursday nights at midnight Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific. Music and dedications for the grown and sexy.
This
This is your Rainier Avenue Radio.world community update on free or low-cost Apple Health enrollment through December 15th. In Washington State, Medicaid is called Apple Health, and it provides preventative care like cancer screenings, treatment for diabetes and high blood pressure, and many other healthcare services. Enrollment is now open through December 15th. Online at wahealthplanfinder.org or call the customer support center at 855-923-4633. Once again, Apple Health enrollment is now open through December 15th at wahealthplanfinder.org or by calling 855-923-4633. This has been your Rainier Avenue Radio.world community update.
Atlantic Street Center has been serving the children, youth, and families of the Seattle-King County area since 1910. We partner with families and communities to raise healthy, successful children and youth through services including counseling, early learning, youth development, domestic violence, and education support for school-aged children. Committed to serving the African-American community, Atlantic Street Center provides services and support for all marginalized people. Learn more at AtlanticStreetCenter.org.
You're listening to Rainier Avenue Radio.world. Check us out on social media, Facebook and Instagram, Rainier Avenue Radio.world, and on Twitter at Rainier Ave Radio.
Hello, welcome back. Thank you all for your patience and yeah, thank you. So if we could go back into that slide, Beverly, please. Thank you. All right. Can we put it back in panel format? All right, here we go. Thank you. Okay. Oh, next slide, please. Thank you. So we're just going to take a moment here to discuss this. I'm not sure if you had it on this slide, but I want to get some, feedback. Connor's going to go ahead and start off if you'd like to do that, Connor.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Carmen. So I really like the conversation, how this presentation is building a conversation and everybody's input. Just to speak to a little bit of what we were talking about previously, and then I'll go into this next slide, is that Terrell had some really amazing points about doing the work. I can't speak to the psychological effects of hearing about systemic racism and the issues at hand, and I don't have any place to do so. But listening to our BIPOC leaders about how we change this field and how we dismantle these policies and change organizations is super important to me. Listening to leaders, Black, Indigenous, people of color in my work is something that I have to do if I want to be anti-racist in the work that I do. And it's extremely important to me. So thank you for that conversation and continuing to bring that up. If we can go back to that slide for why race matters. So why race matters? Race matters because it is an imperfect proxy for racism and racial discrimination. Race as a genetic concept is irrelevant. The idea that race is important because of a notion of genetic homogeneity has been thoroughly debunked. So studies that try and look at is there true, difference between race on a scientific level. That's been, just completely debunked. It's not real science. It's that pseudoscience trying to find that, but it's not true. And furthermore, race is a scientific concept. It never rested on a firm scientific foundation. Biologically, there are no pure distinct races. And if race does not distinguish humans from one another genetically, then why does it matter in that way? There are several studies that document that race has been shaped by cultural, political, ideological, and legal functions in society. And we see that on a consistent basis with the policies that have been put in place to rule in a way that is beneficial to white people. That race is a social construct, something that has meaning only because society gives it meaning. We put it out there, and I know we were talking about economic equality, but if we don't have equity first, the economic equality, it won't really matter. Because there's still going to be, white privilege. It's not going to be something that just goes away if the, economic playing field is the same. And so where economic equality is important, working towards the equity needs to be on the forefront. In my mind and in the work that I do. Could I get that slide back really quick? Just for my visual. Thank you. Ooh, the next one. One more. Perfect. So race is a historical construct. So as a historical construct, such construct is no less powerful than a biological construct. Once society conveys meaning, that meaning has impact and consequences. Race matters because society engages in racism and racial discrimination. So identifying that, I'm not colorblind. I know who is Black. I know who is brown. I can see race, and it matters because of the way that those races are treated differently from one another. So for me, being a white man, like I talked in my personal experience, where I found passion in this work was that, I being a recovering addict, being a consumer of mental health services, being somebody who, was homeless, experienced homelessness, living under a bridge in Spokane, Washington. I was still, when services were provided, and I watched this firsthand, it's not something that I've just done research on. It's part of my lived experience that BIPOC individuals were often overlooked. did not receive the same services that I received, even when we were in the same place, socially, economically. I was often, if I was in a group of others receiving services, and in that place, I was, picked over to receive those services more than Black, Indigenous people of color. Friends that were Black, did not receive the same level of care. Additionally, looking at the economic point of view, is that my family members did have a higher, socioeconomic status. So it's important to look at that. But a lot of the times I was receiving services that were free, were government funded, were grant funded. And so looking at that and wondering why, it's because of those policies. It's because of screening out due to criminal charges that may come from racial bias and systemic racism. It's looking at, socioeconomic status. It's looking at just bias and racism in general as to why I received those services more quickly, more efficiently, and more abundantly as well. I received so many counseling, case management. I had a place to sleep when I asked for help. And I can't really put my finger on anything other than the fact that it was because of my skin color, because I had that white privilege. And so looking at that continues to be important in the work that our organizations do. In my organization that we're working to build. And there's tons of disparities and examples of disparities in health status between racial and ethnic groups, disparities in the justice system, access to healthcare, criminalization of Black and brownness, and like Carmen mentioned earlier, Black women 3 times more likely to die in childbirth. And so looking at that, I look to BIPOC leaders to see how I can shape the program that I'm helping create, how I can help change the conversation, how I can be an ally in this work, because I'm not the expert. I'm lucky to be asked to even be, in a panel like this because of my life experience. And so really building that trust is going to be in huge part by listening to those voices of the leaders that want to create that change and know how to do it. The experts that have the valuable life experience that will show us what it means to be part of those systems where the care is not there. So I can speak all day on what I think is best and how we go forward, making this better for everybody, creating equity. But if I do that on, my own merit and only my own life experiences, I unfortunately will, even without intention, may not create a system that has true equity. And that's something that I've had to learn. I've had to learn how to be anti-racist, how to identify racist policy, and also learn how to reach out to those leaders, Black, Indigenous, people of color, to create a program, to create systems, to be an ally for education, so that we can move closer to equity, to cultural competency, to trauma-informed care, because I just don't have that same life experience. And what I challenge myself to do is, when I hear something that I may think, well, it would work better if we did it this way, is remind myself that even though I do have valuable life experience and my voice is valuable, that the true experience lays with those leaders that have grown up in these systems, that have experienced this. And it wasn't an overnight thing, but the more work I did on myself and the more I learned how to engage with anti-racist policy, how to be an ally, the more change that I saw that I was able to help create, as a support in this world. And that is why I see racism as important, and being an ally as important, and trying to be a true ally, because you can believe that you're an ally, you can believe that you're anti-racist, but if you are, if you're not working for true equity, there's a lot lost there. And if you're not, looking to Black, Indigenous, people of color to really be the leaders and be the voice, it's still not creating a true system of equity. It's doing the same thing that has been happening for decades and hundreds of years, because you're still trying to be the white savior, lead the movement, whereas what I feel like I need to do is be a support, and work towards that with huge guidance.
That's amazing, Connor. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that it takes, significant awareness, intentional reflection, and it takes a point of vulnerability, right? To admit that, as part of white culture, the seeking solutions without bringing the people to the table that are most disproportionately affected creates ineffective program. And if there was a trust bond there, it deviates that trust, or it divides that trust bond. I do want to say that those of us who are in the audience that are listening by radio, you can call in. The number is 206-290-9685 if you have any questions or comments. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And I'd like to take a moment to, see if there's, I think there's close to about 50 people in the Zoom part. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, inquiries? Maybe that's the same as a question. Comments?
I know it's me again, but I just wanted to thank Connor for that perspective, because I have a very similar lived experience, and looking back on it, I saw a lot of the same things, and I think I was just so upset with the quality of care that I was receiving. I was blind to see how much worse the quality of care was for individuals of color, and I just didn't even make that connection. And looking back at all my experiences, I see how the priority my overarching thought process has always been we need to just focus all of our efforts into one end of things. And I'm realizing now that we can't do that unless we get to equity. And even if that was the way to go, we couldn't do that unless we addressed these problems first. So I mean, you just peer counseled the heck out of me, man. Thanks for using that lived experience, because that really changes my perspective on things. So I'm processing that, but I appreciate that share. It was really compelling.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. And there's a huge amount of books. There are, about learning how to be anti-racist. And again, the only, it's a learning process still. There's, I'm never perfect. I always have to continue to look at new perspectives and learn to listen. So I appreciate your ears being open, and I appreciate the conversation that this series is able to bring.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Anybody else want to share?
I'd like to maybe get redundant again. I thank you, Mike and Connor. I think it's very important to be in this space. I think it would be a disservice if I don't share with you again that potentially, I think if I was white and I was on this discussion, it may not sting as much to have this kind of dialogue, because I might feel comfortable that I don't have to suffer what other people are suffering. I may possibly, I don't know, I'm not white, but I wonder if I was, if these conversations, if my responsibility after being introduced to the conversation, how would I move the needle to make sure that we start doing something about bringing us all to a point of equity? My concern is that 15, 20 years from now, we may still be in the same space having the same discussion without seeing any solutions that are impactful for all people of color. So I just caution that we start thinking outside the box, spend less time talking about the systemic situation, and spend more time creating an environment or a momentum that gets us in finding a solution that is sustainable.
Yeah, and the purpose of this movement here is to develop a shared understanding, a collective and unified voice across the state, so that we can stand as one, allies and allies impacted, marginalized, oppressed, those with lived experience, those with not, and that we can change these systems. We can dismantle these processes or these systems of inequities that do such great harm. But we all have to work, within what has been set in front of us, this belief system that we've been conditioned into, that there is scarcity, that there is scarcity of funding, that there is scarcity of titles, of who is acknowledged as a leader. When individuals ask me, well, who is tell me who is a Black leader that I can reach out to for this, that, or the other, and I can say, every Black person I have come across is a leader in their own right. They might not be, on the front lines, but they're behind the scenes leading, they're doing something. So for us to fall into this ideology that white culture, white supremacy subscribes to, and leaves us believing that they get to assign titles and therefore, control platforms and access and, funding, we have to dispel those myths, and we can't do that solely through our own organizations. We need a powerful movement. We need legislation. We need policy work being done within the organizations, and we need true liberation. And this is what it is. This is a part of it. So this list here, and Terrell, hopefully I addressed what you were saying, and I hear you 100%. Black and brown people
did so exquisitely well, and I thank you for that clarification. And I embrace your agenda. I'm open armed. I would love to have an opportunity to share some of the work we're doing to help encourage all students to really go after their education during these teenage years, to reach their 20s landing stage. So thank you so much for the clarification, Carmen.
That's why on the 17th from 10 to 12 we'll be live stream like this, and I hope all of you will come back. We'll have more of an opportunity to get the word out there, and panelists such as yourself, Terrell, and Unleash the Brilliance, and Anthony Powers and his organization, and Jeremiah Miller, and others that have built up and created these organizations that are having such a significant impact. We want to make sure that the word is out there that we are duplicating those systems. Connor and I and Angel built up this peer navigator training program because we knew our people needed access to training. We knew that they needed to be able to stabilize if they were experiencing addiction or mental health issues, if they were experiencing homelessness. We wanted to compensate them. We get them trained to be peer navigators so they can return to the system and help our brothers and sisters that are still there. And by brothers and sisters, I mean all marginalized and oppressed communities. That's everyone across the board. And we're building out these ripple effects. And Terrell, just as you doing your work with your youth right now, you're creating that ripple effect that's going to repair these systems.
She's talking about, I think, community college. So that's why I was wondering.
I'm sorry, if there's not a comment that's being made to us, can we please keep ourselves on mute? Let's go ahead. We're going to go to the next slide. And this is just some of the areas. Well, we'd already discussed that. Social conditioning. We're going to take a break here, and I want the individuals that are in the Zoom, everybody just to take a look at those. I want to hear about impact. We're moving this forward means engaging in uncomfortable dialogue. If you have any questions or comments, if you're listening, please call in 206-290-9685. Thank you, Rainier Avenue Radio, for creating this platform for us. And we're going to be going into a break here in just a moment. Thank you.
Rainier Avenue Radio.
The Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, empowering communities and changing lives. The Urban League has been there to serve when our community is at its lowest. It's never mattered what the crisis was. The systemic oppression remains constant for those most vulnerable. Here at the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle, we'll be temporarily adjusting our hours of operation and available services. If you are in need of resources, we recommend that you give us a call at 206-461-3792. To make an appointment, press 0 and speak with the receptionist. Walk-in hours will be from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Monday through Friday. And hey, we'll gladly work with you via phone as best as we can if you're exhibiting any signs of illness to assist you with information to save your home, find you a place to sleep, or connect you to job opportunities. The Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. That's 206-461-3792.
We got the feeling now. Yeah.
R&B, soul, funk, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. We give you all that and more on Star Time. Join me, Paul Pearson, for a 2-hour trip through the history of R&B. A new episode every week on Wednesday at 2 p.m. Come and get the feeling on Star Time on RainierAvenueRadio.world.
Help a child in need during the holidays. The good people at GivingGiftsOfHope.org have requests for baby toys, dolls, trucks, and remote control cars. You can bring unwrapped toys to Taproot Cafe and Bar, where there is a large wrap box to place toys Tuesday through Saturday 11 to 7 and Sunday 11 to 5. Taproot Cafe and Bar is located in Columbia City at 4908 Rainier Avenue South off of Hudson Street. For more info on supporting families during the holidays, go to www.givinggiftsofhope.org. Happy holidays.
Welcome to the Fitness Corner. I'm your host, Mark Bryant, and you're going to get a whole total body workout on my show, starting off with a warm-up, aerobics, strength training, cool down, and stretching every Friday from 11:30 to 12 right here on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Rainier Avenue Radio, your community radio station will provide you with more information. Rainier Avenue Radio.
All right. Welcome back. Getting a little bit of static on the line. Can others hear that static? No?
Oh,
Okay.
I was hearing it too, but it looks like it's going down a bit, so that's good.
All right, perfect. It's good. It's good. All right. Well, thank you again for your patience. And again, those of you who are in our listening audience, please, if you feel free to call in 206-290-9685. Those of you that are in our Zoom audience, if you've had a moment to reflect upon this, do you have any insight, feedback, inputs?
And if anybody does see anything in the chat that is really pertinent for us to hear and continue the conversation, don't hesitate to just read that out. We're not on the Zoom link itself. We're going directly over the Rainier Avenue Radio. So having that resource is valuable for us as well.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Hunter. So to become anti-racist or to dismantle systems that you are affiliated with or that you are part of, one of the first steps in doing so is recognizing your own implicit and or explicit bias, right? Bias is a construct that we are, one, biologically responsive to, because back in the, original days or times, we needed to be able to interpret danger. And, it was part of our biological survival mechanism. But how it's been impacted now through, years of conditioning, we get that through the television, through, our families of origin, through our educational system. Every system speaks to us of the inequities and the dehumanization of individuals of color, of people with disabilities, of people with gender neutral, or that are gender neutral, excuse me. So again, beyond race, every single marginalized and oppressed community. So we know that the bias is such a mental construct that we often aren't even aware of it and how it manifests in our behavior. And it may not even align with our declared, actions or behavior, because it is so much in an unconscious manner, but explicitly it comes out through behaviors. One of the things that Connor spoke of when he so articulately said that he has engaged in this journey of awareness, knowing that we have the ability to be intentionally reflective and address our biases is critical to moving systems forward. And I want to add, just because I am a Black woman does not mean that I am without biases. Like, we have all been socially conditioned into these, but it's my responsibility to liberate myself from them. They're a predictor, as I said, of our behavior, as how we show up in the world and how we engage with others. They create barriers to inclusion. We make determinations and rapid judgments based upon someone's appearance or perceived ability, or socioeconomic status, and then we determine who is valuable here. And this is what often harms inclusive, being inclusive within organizations that we represent. Because we feel like if we can get a Black person, if we can get a Muslim, if we can get an Indigenous person, we're calling on each category that is, again, just a social construct, and thinking that, now that we have achieved these people at the table, or brought these people to the table, that now we're doing some real work, But unless it's a authentic relationship that provides a shared power model, and these people have, decision-making capability, it is simply just tokenization. I'll tell you an experience. When Connor and I came together and created this program, we partnered with the justice system because we knew it was so important for members within the justice system to understand that people do change. That one, the judicial system and mass incarceration is one of dehumanization, violence, and destruction. Nobody's going into jail or prison and learning a lesson and coming out better from it. They're coming out more traumatized. So looking at, who we lock up and why do we lock them up. And we know the disparities that exist within Black and Brown communities and the over-incarceration of those communities, as well as people with disabilities, people living in poverty, the homeless, and so as we built this justice system community collaborative, people would walk into the room and look right at the whitest person with the highest title, and with this perceived power. And in doing so, they would shut down our voices who are driving this program, and so it took, and there was a lot of walkouts too, because people were just done with it. That every time that I have to step into a room and, reaffirm that we're here in a shared power space, that just because she has a title of director of detention, or he has a title of law and justice administrator, or he has a title of, director of the public defender's office, does not mean that you shut down our voices. We are leading this. And, eventually it took, some time and energy. And oftentimes that was emotional labor energy to continue to voicing that and putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations where sometimes it was perceived as confrontational. But it's within our roles to do this as we dismantle these systems. And ultimately, all of this social conditioning can be undone. You know, these systems of racism and inequity can be dismantled. We have the ability to do that. Does anybody have any questions, comments, thoughts? All right, let's go ahead and go to, and I hope you had the opportunity to read that little comment there, because I think that that is so, especially right now, you know, I mean, we're still going through, you know, this Black Lives Matter movement where it's being interpreted as an anti-policing movement, and, you know, having to re-educate, you know, justice system, policing agencies, you know, of what this is about. Black existence, you know, Black humanity. It's not about, you know, black against law enforcement. I saw somebody put something in the chat. Was there something you wanted to say? All right. Okay, so Connor, you want to go ahead and let's go to the next slide, please.
Absolutely. So understanding bias and taking a look at that. So this little blurb says, our implicit biases are the result of mental associations that have formed by the direct and indirect messaging we receive. So that's something that, you know, I've had to personally work on, is my biases and identifying that. And biases can really shape how we treat others, you know, when we're in decision making. And that's why it's important to look at that. So if we're still continuing to, you know, assimilate to our bias, one thing is that we can't, you know, we can't be true allies, at least for myself, if we are still under those biases. Often, you know, and then when we are constantly exposed to certain identity groups being paired with certain characteristics, we can begin to automatically and unconsciously associate the identity with the characteristics, whether or not that association aligns with reality. And that's what bias is in a nutshell, is believing something about somebody just by the way that they present themselves. So, you know, biases that we look at and we have talked about in our work is, you know, say specifically on our website, is having a true diversity on the website. Because when we use, you know, our work is directly related to recidivism. You know, when we use, you know, pictures that unequally represent BIPOC individuals in that format, it's automatically creating a bias that Black, Brown, and Indigenous people are automatically, you know, more likely to be incarcerated, not because of systems, but because of who they are. And when we look at the statistics of why those things happen, it's not it's not that your skin color makes you more likely to, you know, have a criminal charge. It's because systems, you know, automatically are less lenient, more harsh, and create more negative opportunities in those systems. And so bias for me is making sure that we are taking a look inwardly, how we're looking at others, and not just Black and Brown and Indigenous people, but people with disabilities, LGBTQ individuals, you know, anything that, you know, we can identify and look at outwardly, because we do see those things. And that's where we have to take a look in ourselves and identify those biases that we have, and then reshape that by being part of conversations and being part of education that change the way that we look at the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Connor. Perfect. Let's go ahead and go on to the next slide. And it's quite simple, right? I mean, what are we doing? What are we engaging in? Racial justice, racial equity, anti-racism. And this is it. Like, racism stops with me. It stops with you. It stops with each one of us. You know, we have the power to disrupt these systems, these harmful systems. Next slide, please. And just so we have a firm understanding, I think that there's multiple, constructs out there of what actually racism is. The marginalization and oppression based upon socially construct racial hierarchy that privileges white people. And, any questions or thoughts about this? Okay, so now you know what racism is. What are we going to do about it? How to be work in an anti-racist world. Connor, you want to go ahead and take that one on? I'm just going to let you know that we will be stopping at 11:57. So I want to make sure that we can get through the rest of this and also open up for some dialogue here. So Connor, you okay with this, or you want me to do it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can go ahead and do this. So like it says on the slide, anti-racism is the active process of identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies, practices, and attitudes that so that power is redistributed and shared equitably. And that's the truth. I know that we've talked a lot about systemic racism. We've talked about systems of racism. And from what I've learned from others who have experienced this is that policies and systems are either racist or they're anti-racist. There's no real in-between. It can't be, there's not a gray area between racism and anti-racism. It's either one or the other. So anti-racism examines the power imbalances between racialized people and non-racialized white people. These imbalances play out in the form of unearned privileges that white people benefit from, racialized people do not. So just automatic things that are, that we're living with in our society, where that privilege is automatically there based on no merit, but skin color, and that's why looking at this is important. The differences between racist policy and anti-racist policy. Anti-racism is the practice of identifying, challenging, and changing the values, structures, and behaviors that perpetuate systemic racism. So looking to organizations to change policies and procedures, asking for leaders that are Black, Indigenous people of color, so that we can find equitable anti-racist policies within those organizations is so important. I think that goes to Terrell's point about, what are the next steps, not just saying, what's happening because it looks like we know what's happening, but doing something about it so that things can change. Anti-racism is an active way of seeing and being in the world in order to transform it. Because racism occurs at all levels and spheres of society and can function to produce and maintain exclusionary levels and spheres, anti-racism education activism is necessary in all aspects of society. In other words, it does not happen exclusively in the workplace, in the classroom, or in selected aspects of our life. That's absolutely true, because if you're working in a system that is anti-racist, but then in your day-to-day life you are taking part in racism, you're not really working within anti-racism, because you're not taking a look inwardly to remove those biases. You may be thinking you are, but if you're still partaking outside of those systems that you're serving, it's not having the same effect as you might hope, because if the biases are still there, it's going to eventually create some type of racist policy.
Absolutely. Great information. Thank you, Connor. Next slide, please. So demystifying race and anti-racism, we've talked about it being a social construct. There is no race, and if it were a perfect world, I would be demystifying this white construct in which white people continue to identify as white people, which allows them to perpetuate the power imbalance. That's something that's definitely in the works as we are deprogramming individuals to, as I had mentioned earlier, when you walk into a room, you look at the whitest person with the highest title as having the power. As people of color, their white culture, and we've seen this through the Black Lives Matter movement, is experiencing extreme instability because they see the rise in Black voices, Black and brown voices, and other communities that have otherwise been marginalized or oppressed, rising, platforms being created, power imbalances being corrected, and that's creating distress. The distress is unfortunately showing in behaviors of harm towards communities of color and otherwise vulnerable populations. So we need to continue to collectively build platforms where we are, not only caring for our own, but building power through our collective and unified voice. So we've really talked, I think we've gone really into how, the construct of race became a white, or it was a white, or is a white supremacy agenda to continue to maintain power, to build constructs of inferiority. Why is it it's so easy for an officer to murder a Black man, a Black woman, a Black child, in every situation? The absence of that individual's humanity is absent because they have been socially conditioned into white supremacy to believe that they are superior, and so they're in this protective state, able just to cut down and end somebody's life without accountability. And that's huge. And, as we continue to grow and, I thought myself, as a leader in, racial equity work and reform effort, all I need to do is show up and be present in non-threatening manners with police, with justice system officials, desensitize them to Black presence. But it doesn't matter. We can show our humanity, from now until the end of time. But unless we're undoing these constructs, unless we're dismantling their system of violence and racism, we're not moving an inch. Any questions, thoughts, feedback on this? Okay. So next slide, please. All right. Well, this is a pause and reflection side. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide and just keep this idea in mind. So this is what equity, the expectations. What do we want? What are we driving for? What are we pushing for? If they're harmful systems in practice, are we building up systems alongside that are non-harmful, that are just and allow our communities to have access to thrive? Being committed, like we've had hundreds of years of battling systems of inequity. We will persevere. We will teach those who come after us. We will pass the torch, and it will continue the work will continue. Again, we have to be invested in a sustainable interaction with the spaces that we set in, whether we're ally or people of color or impacted in some other way. Always maintaining that integrity of that voice and of the movement, staying focused. Sometimes they'll throw titles at us, they'll throw money at us, and they will hope to silence us because they are extremely uncomfortable. But stay focused, remain hopeful, and be the change. And we are at a 2 minutes, or no, a 3 minute mark, I think.
It looks like one minute.
Okay. Okay. So you guys have been an amazing audience. I'm looking so forward to next week, where we will have Tyrell Dorsey from Unleash the Brilliance. We will have Anthony Powers representing his organization. Jeremiah Miller with Rising Strong. Angel Tomio Sam, she is a bail disruptor with the Bail Project. And you'll have Connor and I as well. Lataxion of Instep. Thank you all for showing up and spending this morning with us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Here with the Rainier Avenue Radio traffic update. You can listen to us in your car